think so. I think it's really significant. I think to think about the fact our country is as old as it is, and we've only had 45 presidents. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. Interesting facts. I think 8 presidents have died in office. 4 were assassinated. 4 died of quote unquote natural causes. William Henry Harrison was only president for 60 days. During his inauguration speech, he was the oldest president elected up to that point. And during his inauguration speech, he wanted to prove that he was 68 years old. He wanted to prove that he was tough. So it's hard to reign. And he did a speech anyway, which was 90 minutes long. He caught pneumonia and died. So he was the shortest running president, 60 days. Zachary Taylor died of a ruptured stomach lining from overeating, we think. We don't know for sure, but he died of a ruptured stomach lining. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Garfield was assassinated. McKinley was assassinated. Warren G. Harding, we're not sure of. The official cause of death was food poisoning, but we're not. There are rumors in history that it wasn't food poisoning; it was poisoning, and that he was assassinated. But we're not. That's not because he was the president. They didn't do a really thorough autopsy, and they just said, "Okay, food poisoning. We'll go with that." Franklin Roosevelt died of natural causes related to his polio, and John F. Kennedy was assassinated. All right, 8 presidents have been related to each other. John Adams and John Quincy Adams, father and son. William Henry Harrison and Benjamin Harrison, grandfather and grandson. Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt were cousins. George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, father and son. We had 2 Johnsons, but they're not related. Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson, but they're not related. But to think about that, so out of 45 presidents, 46 presidents now, 10 of them have had connections in their names. It's kind of an interesting thing, I think. Okay, so the office is established in Article 2 of the Constitution. One of the things that has been an issue in the last few years is that the Constitution is, if you ever looked at a copy of it, it's a very small document. It's not very long. And when it comes to describing different things about the government, it's kind of vague, and because the expectation was that we would kind of learn as we went along. Everybody knew in their hearts that the first president of the United States, when they were writing the Constitution, that the first president of the United States was going to be George Washington. So when they were designing the presidency, they were kind of had him in mind when they were kind of thinking about, like, for example, why is the president the commander-in-chief of the military? Because everybody said to themselves, George Washington would be really good at that. So that was kind of in their head when they were making all the different plans about the president of the United States. So Article 2 of the Constitution is the presidency. Section 1 describes what the president can and cannot do. It describes how the president is chosen, and it gives the qualifications to be president. They're very simple qualifications. You have to be a citizen of the United States, born in the United States, and you have to be 35 years old, and that's it. Those are the only qualifications for president. The youngest president we've had has been Teddy Roosevelt. He was 39 when he became president because he was the vice president. McKinley was assassinated. And John F. Kennedy was the youngest president elected at 40. Most of the presidents have been in their 50s. Now we've got, for the 3rd time, we've had a president in his 70s. Section 2 describes the jobs of the president, like like, for example, commander-in-chief. It also gives the idea of advice and consent, which is basically that any positions the president wants to fill, Supreme Court, cabinet, things like that, have to be approved by the Senate. That's explained in Section 2 of the Constitution. Section 3 describes the responsibilities of the president. One thing, the president has to give a State of the Union address. It doesn't, just recently speaking historically, that the president does it on television and does it even on the radio when the radio was invented. It does it in front of Congress. George Washington did it in front of Congress. John Adams did it in front of Congress. Thomas Jefferson did not like speaking in public. So when it came time for the State of the Union address, he sent a letter and had them read it in Congress instead. So the president does not have to go in front of Congress to give the State of the Union address, but he does have to give one once a year. He makes recommendations to Congress. So for example, when a person runs for president and says, I'm going to cut taxes, he can't. He can recommend that they cut taxes, but he can't do it himself. The Congress is called and adjourned by word of the president. Usually it's a formality, but the president can cancel Congress if he wants to. He says, okay, guys, you're done, go home. He can do that if he wants to. No president has ever done it, fingers crossed, but that's one of the powers of the president. They meet with foreign dignitaries. One of the things that people point out is our president, the job of our president combines two functions. Most countries have two functions, where they run the country, but they also meet with the foreign dignitaries. In other countries, they have two separate people do those jobs. He's the executor of the law. Every law enforcement person in the United States, from the attorney general down to the local police officer, technically works for the president of the United States. His job is to enforce the laws. And then the sixth responsibility of the president is commissioning officers in the military. If you are an officer in the military, from a lieutenant up to a general or an admiral, your commission comes from the president of the United States. Again, usually it's kind of a formality, but you should be getting a document saying you've been appointed by the president of the United States. And then section 4 describes impeachment. So he used to be able to say only 2 presidents have been impeached, but now it's 3. 3 presidents have been impeached. A lot of people get confused. They think that being impeached means being removed from office. No, being impeached means that that people say this guy's done something wrong and he should be impeached. There have been a lot of times in history where Congress wanted to impeach the president, but didn't, because they didn't think either that, because it says in the Constitution, it can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. And so that becomes a really arguable point. Andrew Johnson, who's the first president, was impeached. He was impeached because Congress passed the law right after Lincoln died that said that Johnson could not fire anybody that Lincoln had appointed. And Johnson thought that was ridiculous because he was a president. He should be able, if someone wasn't a good job, he should be able to fire them. So to test the law, he fired somebody, which meant he broke the law, and so he was impeached. He was impeached and then went to trial, and tried in the Senate. And in the trial in the Senate, not everybody, but enough people agreed to say it was a really bad law, so we're not going to remove him from office. Richard Nixon was about to be impeached and he resigned before he could be. Bill Clinton was impeached. Again, I always thought that it didn't really quite fit up to high crimes and misdemeanors. Basically, he was impeached for lying about having sex with that woman, to quote him. And then Mr. Trump was impeached, I think, for the first time following the rules of high crimes and misdemeanors. He was doing something that a president should not be doing, negotiating with foreign countries without approval of Congress or the Senate. So, okay, there have been 5 amendments added to the Constitution that have to do with the president. The 12th Amendment changed how the vice president is elected. Up until the 12th Amendment, the way the elections worked was when 2 people ran for president, or sometimes more, but whoever came in second was the vice president. So if that hadn't changed, Donald Trump's vice president would have been Hillary Clinton. Imagine that. That's kind of interesting to think of. So that changed that so that it was a ticket instead of just whoever came in second was the vice president. The 20th Amendment, which happened during Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, changed the inauguration from March to January. It had been in March originally because communication wasn't very good. And so by the 20th century, the communication was improved, and it really wasn't necessary to stretch it out that long to March. The 22nd Amendment placed term limits on the president right after Roosevelt passed, because he was elected 4 times. And being president makes it really, it's really easy. It's a lot easier to elect the president if you're already president. And so people realized it was kind of tricky. So they put term limits. The president is the only office in the federal government that's limited to terms. The 23rd Amendment gave DC residents the right to vote and electoral votes. And the 25th Amendment clarified the terms of presidential succession or incapacitation. It used to be, until the 25th Amendment, that if the president died, the vice president took his place. If the vice president died, then members of the cabinet would take it, and they'd be appointed in the order that that cabinet position was created historically. Well, that's changed now. It's the president, the vice president, the speaker of the House, and the president of the Senate. So that's been changed. Also, the 25th Amendment has now put in there ways to get a president out if he's not capable of doing his job, either physically or mentally. And there was talk in the last couple of years of getting the 25th Amendment, bringing it up, but it has to be, to do that, you have to have the cabinet approve it. And the cabinet that Mr. Trump has is a little bit more of a rubber stamp than a deliberative body, in my opinion. I have to say, a lot of my opinion is going to creep in here a lot, but I can't help myself, sorry. Okay. So the Electoral College, this is my big bugaboo. I am a very anti-electoral college for a lot of different reasons. People wonder why in the first place, because it is, the idea was to make sure that no large state, large meaning population-wise, could dominate the whole electoral process. Also, the idea of Electoral College was they were afraid of giving people the direct vote on the president. Back 200 and some years ago, they weren't sure that people could handle directly voting for the president. But one of my issues with the Electoral College has to do with the way it works. For example, if you see Montana here, right there, Montana gets 3 electoral votes. California gets 55. Okay. In Montana this year, 150,000 people voted for president. That means that they get 1 electoral vote for every 50,000 people that vote. Okay. In California, 55 million people voted. I'm sorry, 5.5 million people voted. That means, and the population of California is 55 million, which means that in California, each person gets 100,000 votes. For 100,000 votes gets 1 electoral vote. In Montana, the 50,000 people get 1 vote. So it's really not an unbalanced thing. Plus, in Puerto Rico, people in Puerto Rico can vote for president, but they don't get any electoral votes. And until the amendment that changed it, Washington D.C. was the same way. So the electoral system, in my opinion, really doesn't work very well. 2 states, Nebraska, right here, and Maine, have in their constitution that the electoral votes can be split. So the way, if you've been paying attention to the elections in the last few weeks, so California majority went for Biden, so he gets 55 electoral votes, and so on all through the states. But Nebraska and Maine split it up proportionally. So, for example, in Nebraska, Joe Biden got 1 of their electoral votes, and President Trump got 4. In Maine, Biden got 2, and Biden got 3, and Trump got 1. So those 2 states split them by percentages. If you're going to have electoral vote, to me that seems a little bit better, but still I'm kind of an anti-electoral vote person. But to change it, 2/3 of the states have to agree to it, and 2/3 of the states kind of like the way, more than 2/3 of the states like the way it is now, and not going to want to change it. So it's probably not going to change in my lifetime anyway, I don't think, even though I wish it would. Okay, questions before we start? Everybody good? All right, first president, George Washington. Was president from 1789 to 1797. He first president, 2 terms, because he was asked to do a 3rd term and said no. And because of that, a lot of people, every president since then, except for FDR, followed that tradition and said only 2 terms. And then the amendment changed, the 23rd Amendment changed it and said, okay, we're going to limit, the 22nd Amendment changed it, said we're going to limit the terms. Washington was the first. And as I said, he was the model. What the First Lady does or did for a long time was shaped by what his wife did. The way the fact that he gave the State of the Union in front of Congress was because of him. So he was like the model for every president that followed, for good or bad. I think mostly for good. And I think he deserves to be on Mount Rushmore because he's the model for every president since then. I'd like to say, just before I forget, John Meacham, who's a great presidential historian, has pointed out, I think, one of the most important jobs of the president. He said, our country has lots of negative impulses. It does. I mean, we had slavery, we had Jim Crow, we had all kinds of terrible, terrible things our country's done. The president's job, according to John Meacham, and I agree with him, is to moderate those negative impulses, to appeal to the better angels of our nature, is the term he uses. And George Washington was a perfect example of that. Things about him that I think are kind of interesting. He was very strong. When he was a young man, he used to win bar bets all the time, but with feats of strength. He could take a walnut and crack it between his 2 fingers. He could take a horseshoe and bend it straight with his bare hands. So great physical strength. He loved horseback riding. In fact, his love of horseback riding is kind of what did him in the end, because he was out horseback riding and got caught in a storm and caught pneumonia, and that's how he died. He's the first president to get his face on a stamp. When he ran for president, there were 12 candidates for president. We usually think of maybe 2, but there were 12. He came in, he won, he got 69 electoral votes versus 34 for everybody else. Second place was John Adams, who became the vice president. He's the only president, when he was president, to wear a military uniform as commander-in-chief during the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania. He decided he was going to stop this rebellion, and said, I'm the commander-in-chief. He put his old uniform on, led the troops, put down the rebellion, but he was the first president to do it and the last president to do it. Well, I can say something. I'm gonna keep quiet what I was gonna say. Anyway, John Adams. John Adams was only a 1-term president. I think was a really brilliant person in all kinds of ways, but very unlikable. People just did not like him. They didn't like him when he was a representative of Massachusetts, and they didn't like him when he was president. Alexander Hamilton referred to him as the toad in chief. He did not like him at all. But I think the biggest interesting, I think, for him was he was the first president to live in, well, let me say, I've got this written down. He was the first president to live in the White House. And one of the big things that got people get mad at him when he was vice president was he kept leading debates in Congress about what should we call the presidents. And he kept coming with all kinds of like European type, his excellence, his elected excellency and things like that. And this just drove people crazy. Said, John, we don't like you anyway, stop talking about it. But he worked really hard to keep us out of what was going on in Europe, the French Revolution and so on. He's one of the 2 presidents who signed the Declaration of Independence. And when he ran against 11 other candidates and came in first. Thomas Jefferson came in second, so he was the vice president. Thomas Jefferson. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson. His favorite vegetable was, he loved vegetables. He had, on his farm in Monticello, he had 30 different versions of lettuce. He loved vegetables. He played the violin. He had a pet mockingbird named Dick. Every president in history has had a pet except for one. The current president apparently doesn't like animals. He donated his personal library to the U.S. Library of Congress. In the War of 1812, Washington, D.C. was burned down by the British, including the Library of Congress. And so in his will, he left his library to replace the Library of Congress that had been destroyed in the War of 1812. So the foundation of the Library of Congress, and you can go today if if you're part of the historical community, you can go today and use Thomas Jefferson's books to study, to research. In the election of 1800, he had 4 opponents, and the vote was 73 to 73. So they had to break the tie, 73 electoral votes, 73, and Aaron Burr became the vice president. But one of the people who voted against him was Alexander Hamilton, which later led to a duel between Burr and Hamilton got killed. He was the first president to be affiliated with a political party. George Washington, in his farewell address, said, one of the worst things that ever could happen to the United States of America was the formation of political parties. He must have turned over in his grave. Thomas Jefferson did not belong to a political party, but he was John Adams did not belong to a political party. Thomas Jefferson did. Basically, and it hasn't changed, but the names have changed, but the philosophy hasn't much changed. Originally, the parties were the Federalist Party and the Democratic Party. The Federalist Party believed very strongly in a strong central government. The Democratic Party believed in the rights of the power of the vote. That's why Thomas Jefferson considered himself a Democratic Republican. He said that America would only do well if the good, solid American people voted. And people like John Adams and Alexander Hamilton, no, America will only do well if we have a strong central government, because Americans don't always make the right choices. And during his second run, the 12th Amendment changed the way the vice president was chosen. So his vice president, when in the first term, was Aaron Burr, but when he ran the second time, it already changed things. So he was able to pick a running mate to be his vice president. He's also the person that did the Louisiana Purchase, doubled the size of the United States. That's why his face is the second face on Mount Rushmore, because Mount Rushmore is in part of the territory that was added because of the Louisiana Purchase. James Madison, the smallest president of all, was president from 1809 to 1817. He was president during the War of 1812. His wife Dolly was kind of famous for rescuing the art in the White House when the British burned Washington. But he was the smallest. He was a little over 4'8", and when he was soaking wet, weighed about 90 pounds. So he was the tiniest president.
Oh, damn.
He was one of the writers of the Bill of Rights. He very strongly believed that the Constitution could not be approved unless the first 10 amendments were added.
I don't think it ever would. I don't know why I didn't just say that.
5'4", I'm sorry, I said 4'8", 5'4" and 100 pounds. He was the first president to wear long pants. Everyone else wore those knickers that you see in most of the pictures. He was a Democratic Republican like Thomas Jefferson, who won 128 to 89 the first time he ran. He and Thomas Jefferson were really good friends. And he also wrote the Federalist Papers, which were the argument for approving the Constitution. And he had a large part in writing the Constitution. So he really stands out as one of the shapers of our country. James Monroe, his big thing is the part that comes after his name, the Monroe Doctrine. The idea that the Europeans should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere, and that was used as a argument for getting involved in Cuba and Central America and South America and Mexico And we tried getting involved in Canada, but that didn't turn out very well. But his idea was that the United States would not allow European interference in our country. He's the first president to ride on a steamboat. His favorite meal was chicken and biscuits. And he won his first election 183 to 34 as a Democratic Republican. You notice later on, I'll start having vote numbers. They didn't keep very good track of the vote numbers back in those days. So we just have the electoral count when we look at their votes. John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, and just as unpopular as his father. He had been the foreign secretary of ambassador to England. And so people thought that his experience in that area was a good one. There was a big debate in the United States about whether we should support France or England during this time. And because most people were leaning towards England, because he'd been the ambassador there, people went along with voting for him. But again, he was just almost as unlikable as his father. So he was the first president to be photographed. It wasn't until afterwards. He was photographed in 1846. He had a pet alligator in the White House. His hobby was he raised silkworms. He liked agriculture. Both Adamses were big agriculturalists. He was a Democratic Republican, but he lost the electoral vote, 84 to 89, and the popular vote. But because neither one won a majority, it went to the House. That's what happens if you don't get an electoral college. Like people talk about the magic number this time, the 270 now. If neither one had gotten a 270, the vote would have gone to the House. And so he lost the electoral vote. Here's an example. He lost the popular vote, but because the House, most of the states were Democratic, Republican, they voted for him instead of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson never forgave most of the people he never forgave Adams. He never forgave the Congress. And it showed when he became president himself later on. But he's the only president in history who lost, but still became president. So it's not a perfect system, obviously. So Andrew Jackson, Mr. Trump's one of Mr. Trump's favorite presidents. I'm not a big fan for a lot of different reasons. He was a war hero, War of 1812. Was also very involved in the Indian Wars of the 1830s, 1820s, 1830s. And because people considered him a war hero, that was a big part. He was the first, George Washington was the first war hero president. Andrew Jackson was the first one after the Revolution who was a war hero president. He was an orphan. Up until him, every president Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Quincy Adams had all either been born in Virginia or Massachusetts. The first presidents were either from Virginia or Massachusetts. So he was the first one not born in either of those two states. He was an orphan. We've had 3 orphans as presidents. He was the first. War of 1812. His nickname was Old Hickory because of his generalship. He was a firm believer in the Flat Earth Society. His favorite meal was turkey. I guess that could be a kind of a frontier kind of thing. He was a Democrat. They dropped the Republican part of their name, and he won his first election 178 to 83, and 642,000 to 500,000. This is the first time we have really accurate numbers on the count. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Jackson, partly because of what he did to Native Americans. It was not a very humane thing that he did. And he was also very much against a national currency, which turned out we really needed, but he was very against it. His big shocker for a lot of people was when he was inaugurated, he decided he wasn't gonna have an inaugural ball like all the other presidents had. What he instead was he had open house at the White House, and thousands of people showed up, wrecked the furniture, destroyed the rugs, made a mess. But he was the people's president, he said, so he was going to do it that way. So his campaign song was "My Country 'Tis of Thee" when he ran for president in 1828. So if you would unmute, can you unmute everybody? Yes? We all unmuted?
I tried to unmute everybody. I think it worked.
Let's see if everybody sing along. This is Andrew Jackson's campaign song. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
My country, 'tis of thee, land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where land of the pilgrims ride from every mountain side. Good job, good job. Okay, so that was his campaign song. Martin Van Buren, weirdest hair of any president, in my opinion. One-term president. Not very remarkable as president, I'm afraid to say. He was the first president who was born in the United States, because all the other presidents before him were born before the Revolutionary War. So technically they weren't born in the United States. He had 2 pet tigers. I guess that's what made him unique. His favorite food was oysters and donuts. He was a Democrat who won 170 to 73 with 764,000 popular votes. Okay. William Henry Harrison. No, see, only 1 year for that, because he was the one who only lived for 60 days. And he was a war hero. Another war hero was like that. His campaign slogan was "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," because he was the commanding general at the Battle of Tippecanoe against the Native Americans in the Northwest Territory in the Ohio area. He died 60 days. After he was inaugurated. He was a military hero and a doctor. He had a pet goat named Whiskers, and he was a Whig who won the electoral vote 234 to 60. First president to get over 1 million popular votes. William Henry Harrison. He was replaced by John Tyler, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. John Tyler was the first president Congress talked about impeaching, because they didn't know what to do. He's the first time a president died, and his vice president was supposed to take office, and Congress thought, he's terrible. We don't want him to be president. We should impeach him. But cooler heads prevailed and said, you know what, really, that's not a reason. Just because you don't like him, it's not a reason to impeach him. The thing is, he hated being president. It was true of a lot of the vice presidents who became president, did not like being president. So when the term ran up, he didn't run for re-election. Was really happy to go when it came time. He had the most children of all the presidents. He had 15. And he was the first president to have "Hail to the Chief" played for him. Dun da da dun da da da, dun da da dun da da da. That was composed by someone in the military, and because he was the commander in chief, he was the first president to have that when he walked into a room. Every president since then has had it if he wanted it. Some presidents didn't want it, but it was available for any president who wanted it. James K. Polk. He was the first president to have gas lights in the White House. If you study, it's really interesting to look at the study of the White House to see how it changed as time. George Washington did not live in the White House. John Adams did. All the house cleaning at the White House when John Adams was president was done by his wife, Abigail. So they added servants later on. Here's the president who adds gas lights instead of candles in the White House. And he was a Democrat. So the Democratic Party starts kind of dominating the elections at this point. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was another war hero. He never voted in his life, not even for himself. He didn't believe in elections, which is kind of a weird thing for for a president to say, but that was the case. He was a big tobacco chewer. He was the second president to die in office. He died of a ruptured stomach lining. That's why it's only a year that he was president. They said it was, they think because he overate. The day he got sick, he was at a fair and he drank 2 quarts of ice cold buttermilk and then ate a pound of cherries. And his stomach line ruptured. That was the end of Zachary Taylor. He never voted. He was replaced by Millard Fillmore, another vice president. See, this is a photograph. Another vice president who did not want to be president. And Millard Fillmore, the 13th president, and really unremarkable. He's the one who put a library in the White House, and he installed running water. His political party was the Whig Party, which looks like he has a very bad one right now, but that was the style in those days. Okay, Franklin Pierce was president for only a short amount of time. He had the first Christmas tree at the White House. He was the first president to have kind of a national celebration of Christmas. He loved to fish. So lots of times if they were looking for the president of the United States, they would go to the Potomac River or the park in Washington, D.C., and they would find him fishing. He won by a large margin in the Electoral College, that 254 to 42. People thought that he was going to be a really great president, and he turned out to be kind of mediocre. James Buchanan. He was the only unmarried president. He was the president basically when the Civil War started. He was the first president to send a telegram. He was a Democrat and had 1 million votes. He had a niece who did the duties of the First Lady when he was at the White House, but he himself never had a wife. So, Abraham Lincoln, third face on Mount Rushmore, because he saved the Union. I have a talk that I do on the life and times of Abraham Lincoln, so I don't go into a lot of detail, but in the opinion of most people, one of the greats. According to the current president, the second greatest president of all time. He was the tallest president, 6'4". He loved to wrestle. In his lifetime, he had 300 wrestling matches and never lost a wrestling match. He was the first president that had a beard. One of his sons died while he was president. He had a cat named Bob and a dog named Jib. He was the president during the Civil War. He was the third president to die in office, the first president to be assassinated. It caused a lot of confusion in the United States about how we should handle that. But people stepped up and did the right thing for the most part, I think. If you study it closely, there's some things that are questionable. I think for the most part, people did the right thing. So he won by a big margin the second time. The first time, not by as big a margin because there were 4 people running for president, 3 Democrats and him, which is part of the reason why he won, because the 3 Democrats split the Democratic vote. So he's the first Republican president. So his campaign song was the Battle Hymn of the Republic in 1864. So can we unmute again? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, we all ready? Gonna sing Abraham Lincoln's campaign song. You ready? Okay. Mine eyes have seen the coming of the Lord is trampling out the head where he hath loosed the
Glory, hallelujah.
Glory, glory,
Hallelujah.
glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Nice job. Good job, everybody. Oh, the dog joined in to sing. Okay. Okay. All right. So when Lincoln was assassinated, he was replaced by Andrew Johnson. Lived to 1879. First president to be impeached. He was the first president to meet the Queen of England. He was a tailor before he got into politics. He made all his own clothes. So the suit you see him wearing is a suit he made. He was a member of the National Union Party. Why did a Republican pick somebody else? Because Lincoln was a firm believer in having a mix of people who, not only people who agreed with him, but people who also disagreed with him. Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee, which is one of the states that seceded from the Union. And so Lincoln felt that he should keep his supposed enemies close. And Andrew Johnson was supposed enemy, but he too did not like being president at all. He hated being president. U.S. Grant. His name originally was Hiram Ulysses Grant, but when he went to West Point, they had to put their initials in their underwear, and his initial because in his underwear it said HUG, and he thought that was kind of embarrassing, so he changed his name to Ulysses Simpson Grant instead. Hero of the Civil War. He smoked 20 cigars a day. He got into the habit during the Civil War after he won one of his battles. Someone took a picture of him and he had a cigar in his hand. And people were so impressed with his victory that people started sending him boxes of cigars. And he started smoking them. He smoked 20 a day, which eventually killed him. His favorite food was cucumbers. And he would have died penniless if not for Mark Twain. Mark Twain went to him and got him to write his memoirs and started his own publishing company to publish Grant's memoirs and saved him from dying in poverty and saved his wife, because when Grant died, his wife had nothing. But notice the electoral count, 286 to 0. This is what happens. This is the first time. The second time, not so much. But the first time, because he was such a big war hero, he got that kind of count. Rutherford B. Hayes. He was a Civil War officer, wounded in the Civil War. He was the first president to use the telephone. He started the Easter egg hunt on the White House lawn. And he's one where the Electoral College for the first time got kind of rigged. The election got rigged. When you hear presidents say, this election is rigged, this actually 1876 election actually was rigged. His opponent was a man named Tilden, who won the Electoral College and whose campaign position was to continue the Reconstruction in the South after the Civil War. Rutherford B. Hayes's people went down south to there were a few southern states that had gotten back into the Union and could vote again, and convinced them to change the electoral votes. And they said, if you do, Hayes will end Reconstruction. And so that's what happened. The final results were not finally announced until a week before the inauguration in March. So there was talk about things, people get worried about how nasty things are now. They were really nasty in 1876, 77. But Rutherford B. Hayes was the man who was elected by cheating, basically. His campaign song was America the Beautiful in 1876. So we ready to sing again, everybody? Can I unmute everybody? Okay, ready? Okay.
Ready.
Oh,
beautiful,
Gracious God,
for
and the way
purple
majesty.
America.
America,
From sea to shining sea.
Good job, everybody. Good job. I realized there are campaign songs for every president, but I only picked the ones I thought people might know. So that's why I don't do I don't do very many of them. Okay, Garfield, the second president to be assassinated. He was the first president to be left-handed. The other one was Barack Obama. He was a preacher before he got into politics. And he was a really good juggler. He loved to juggle. He would entertain people by juggling. And he loved mathematics. He would do mathematics in his head for fun. That was Garfield. He was assassinated at a train station. So he was president for only 6 months.
Oh,
He was replaced by Chester Arthur. Was president from 1881 to 1885. As far as the only thing you can say about him, I think, is he loved to fish and he liked to eat lamb chops. He's not very outstanding as a president. And the thing is, he was another one of those vice presidents that did not like being president. So when he had a chance to run again, he didn't run again. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland has the unique distinction of being president for 2 terms separated by a president in between. He was the only president who was married in the White House, had a wedding ceremony at the White House. He had a daughter named Ruth, and they named a candy bar after her. Everybody was so excited about the president having a baby in the White House, that a candy company named a candy bar after her. He's the first president to appear in a movie. He loved hunting, kind of like Teddy. He won the popular vote every time, all 3 times that he ran. He won in 1884, lost in 1888, won again in 1892, but won the popular vote all 3 times. But in the one in 1888, he lost the electoral vote. So there's an example, I think, of where one of the issues with the electoral vote. Benjamin Harrison, grandson of the Harrison who died of pneumonia. He's the one who had electricity installed in the White House. As you can, when you see his nickname, you look at his picture, it's not surprising. They called him the human iceberg. He never showed emotion. And he's the one who lost the popular vote. Well, won the electoral vote. And but just John Quincy Adams lost them both, but won because it was a tie, because there was no majority. This one he lost the popular, but still won the electoral vote. William McKinley. He was the first president to ride in a car. He was the president during the Spanish-American War. He was the 5th president to die in office, and the 3rd one assassinated. He was Republican. And when he ran for his 2nd term, he asked Teddy Roosevelt to be his vice president. A lot of people thought that was a bad idea, but Teddy Roosevelt was the governor of New York, and the Republican Party did not like Teddy Roosevelt. He was a Republican, they didn't like him. And they figured if he became vice president, he would disappear. Let's get rid of Teddy Roosevelt, make him vice president. And Teddy Roosevelt became president anyway. The president of the Senate, who hated his guts, said that damn cowboy is president of the United States. There's Teddy Roosevelt. I do a program on him specifically, so I won't go into too much detail. He's a lot of firsts. First one to fly in an airplane, first one to travel in a submarine, first one to travel outside the United States while he was president. He named the presidential house the White House. That's what they called it. Up until that, they called it the Executive Mansion. He was the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor, but the Congress didn't want to give it to him because they thought he was too popular already. He liked to box, which made him blind in his left eye. A lot of people didn't know that. The teddy bear was named after him, and he ran again and lost in 1912. We've been an hour, so I'm not going to stop for the song, but his campaign song was "Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis, meet me at the fair." That was his campaign song in 1904. Taft, largest president, weighed 332 pounds. Had a pet cow. He was the first president to actually have a presidential limousine. He was the first president to throw out the first pitch at a baseball game. Every president since then, except for one, has done that. And after he was president, he became a Supreme Court justice, which is the job he wanted all along anyway. He ran for president because his wife talked him into it. He didn't want to be president. He wanted to be on the Supreme Court. So afterwards, to kind of get what he wanted, he was appointed to he became the Supreme Court justice. His campaign song was "You're a grand old flag, a high flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave." That was his campaign song. Woodrow Wilson, president during World War I. He golfed. He was the first president to take up golf. He did it a lot. He was the president during World War I. He kept sheep on the White House lawn to mow the grass. He thought didn't make any sense to pay somebody to do it. He had a stroke while he was president. And this is a picture of his wife, Edith. And I put her picture on there because I think she was the first woman president. Because after he had the stroke, he didn't appear in public again. And people would get orders. They'd say, "Oh, this is an order from the president." And there's a debate whether or not it really was from the president. And maybe it was actually from Edith. We don't know for sure. William G. Harding, first president who was ever on the radio, had the biggest feet, even bigger than Taft or Lincoln. Loved playing poker. His election was the first presidential election where women could vote. And he died in office mysteriously. Like I said, they said food poisoning. Some people think that maybe his wife did it because he was having an affair. That's one of the historical rumors about Warren G. Harding. He was replaced by Calvin Coolidge, old Silent Cal from New Hampshire, governor of Massachusetts at one point. Silent Cal. Herbert Hoover was a brilliant man, fluent in Chinese, was a very talented engineer, and had the unfortunate aspect of being president when the Depression hit, and people blamed him. It really wasn't his fault, but you have to blame somebody, so he gets blamed. He made the Star Spangled Banner the national anthem, and the first Catholic to run ran against him. That was Al Smith, and he defeated him. FDR, longest running president, was elected for 4 terms. Had polio. He was the first president to appear on television. He was the first president to have Air Force One. He was in a wheelchair, but they usually try not to show him in the wheelchair. He was the president during the Depression, World War II, elected 4 times as a Democrat. My grandfather, who was a Democrat all his life, the 4th time Roosevelt voted against him. He said no president should be that president 4 times in a row. His campaign song was "Happy Days Are Here Again, the skies above are clear again." That was his campaign song. And in 1940 it was "God Bless America," Kate Smith. God bless America. Harry Truman. The S doesn't stand, it's just an S. He doesn't have a middle name. He thought he should have one. He should have a middle initials, so he gave himself one. Served in World War I, was hard of hearing because of it. A very talented piano player. Succeeded FDR at his death. Was the president at the end of World War II. Authorized the dropping of the A-bomb. And was the president at the beginning of the Korean War. He's the first president I saw when I was a kid. I saw him when I was a kid. Campaign song was "Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative." Dwight Eisenhower, we like Ike, veteran of World War I and World War II. He was a licensed pilot, loved to cook. He was the first president of the 50 states. Very popular. Won by 7 million votes at a time when there were only 60 million votes to begin with. JFK was a Boy Scout, was in the Navy in World War II, first Catholic president, led the United States into Vietnam, and was assassinated in 1963. A lot of the civil rights movement came about because of his initiation. It didn't happen because of him. It happened with Johnson. He became president when Kennedy was killed, led us during the Vietnam War. He was a civil rights president, had the largest popular vote percentage. Look at that, if you see the numbers there. he had 43 million to 27 million against Goldwater. Richard Nixon loved football, played football in college, the first president to visit China, the first president to resign. And the vote was really close. You can see he only won by several hundred thousand votes because George Wallace ran that year and got 9 million votes. The segregationists got 9 million votes. Gerald Ford became president when Nixon resigned. He was the second adopted president. Before he got into politics, he was a male model and professional football player. He's the only president that was not elected president. Because technically vice presidents were elected when they got elected. Jimmy Carter, first president born in a hospital. Imagine that. He was a commander of a Navy submarine, a peanut farmer, and one elector voted for Ronald Reagan that was supposed to vote for Jimmy Carter, voted for Ronald Reagan instead. Who got his, and anyway, next president is an actor and a governor. He loved horseback riding too, like George Washington. He was the oldest president up to that point, and really did a very successful job in the Electoral College and the popular vote. His vice president, George W. Bush, HW, youngest Navy pilot in World War II. He was 17 when he joined the Navy. A very talented baseball player, won by 6 million votes. One elector voted for Benson in that election, Lloyd Benson. William Clinton, third orphan. He was born William Blythe, was adopted by Clinton, played the saxophone, was the second president impeached. And one of the people running when he ran was Ross Perot, who got 19 million votes in that one electoral vote. 19, imagine that. That says something about the Electoral College, I think. George W. Bush played baseball, president during 9/11, led the United States into the war in the Middle East that were still there. He lost the popular vote, won the Electoral College by just 5 votes, and the Florida votes were disputed. Barack Obama, 1961, so very young guy. He's the first African American, led the country through the Great Recession, and won by 10 million votes. Until this last election, he had the most popular votes of any president. Donald Trump, born in 1846, second oldest elected president. Least amount of votes since 2000. He was the third president to be impeached, and he's the fourth one-term president of the last 100 years. It was Hoover, Ford, Hoover, Carter, H.W. Bush, and Trump. Ford wasn't elected. And Joseph R. Biden, largest popular vote in American history, first female and first person of color to be elected to vice presidency. So, if you want to unmute, if anybody has any questions, be glad to answer.
Okay. Well, Lee, who was your favorite president?
Well, it's kind of hard to pick a favorite. I do a one-man show as Teddy Roosevelt, so I'm kind of partial towards Teddy Roosevelt, and I think the 4 guys on Mount Rushmore are my favorites. They deserve to be up there. Those four people are my favorites.
Lee, can Cleveland was elected president, then he lost, then he elected president. Could he have run for a second term after the second time?
Yes, because the 22nd Amendment hadn't come into effect yet, so there's no limit on the presidency at that time.
Okay, so you're limited to only 2 terms as president, irrespective of whether it's consecutive.
Right, 2 terms or 10 years. So like if a vice president becomes president and is president for less than 2 years, he can do 2 more terms after that. So he can do 2 terms or 10 years.
Huh, thank you.
Yep, yeah.
Lee, who
Yeah.
decides who goes out on Mount Rushmore?
That was a congressional committee. Imagine a congressional committee getting anything done.
Yeah.
It was approved. It was approved. It happened during FDR's presidency.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that they were chosen, those four chosen, Washington because he was the first president, Jefferson because he got the Louisiana Purchase, which is where Mount Rushmore is, Lincoln because he saved the Union, and Teddy Roosevelt because he started the national park system.
Hmm.
So they are all there for very good logical reasons. I can't think of anybody who's done those kinds of things that deserves to be there. I know there was talk for a while because Ronald Reagan was very popular, putting him up there, but popularity wasn't the criteria.
Yeah. Is there room for more presidents?
No, there isn't room to put any more up there. You'd have to take one of the other ones down, I guess.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Other questions?
Mhm.
Sorry, I kind of rushed through the last 50 years or so, but I didn't want to keep you too long.
That was very good.
Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you so much.
I think it's really important to understand when Washington was president, what the president could and couldn't do hadn't been determined yet. And they've been, ever since then, they've been adding on what the president can and can't do, more what they can do. And if the first 7 presidents, if they looked at the presidency today, would be really shocked at how much the president they've been allowed to do in the last 10 years or so.
Well, Lee, you had mentioned that at first, the definition of the presidency was left kind of open, kind of vague, and that you would define it as it goes along. And it seemed like that had been happening. But do you think that there's going to be more like documentation of what they can and cannot do based on the last 4 years?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard people talking about, and I've heard Biden talk about this too, is that maybe we should enact some legislation, put some laws on the books instead of I mean, for example, electoral college, the people when they go the electoral college, they vote in December, on December 12th. They don't have to vote. I mean, the electors from Massachusetts don't have to vote for Biden when they go to the electoral college in December. The ones from California don't have to vote for Biden. The ones in Texas don't have to vote for Trump. Some people say we should really put that into law. It shouldn't just be, well, it's the way it's always been. So we'll just kind of, 167 times in American history, the electors have not voted for who they were supposed to vote for. 167 electoral votes total.
Right, so that should be redefined or gotten rid of maybe. But I'm thinking of things like the things that were always the custom, but were not followed for the last 4 years. That really, that maybe now that we've had somebody that pushed the limits should now be documented so that it's in print that you don't do these things.
Right. Yeah. A good example is the cabinet. According to the Constitution, the cabinet has to be approved by the Senate.
Uh-huh.
Half of the members of Mr. Trump's cabinet have not been approved by the Senate. Half have not been approved by the Senate.
And a lot of these acting.
Well, that's what he does. He says, he calls them acting, so they don't have to be approved by the Senate.
Yeah.
It subverts the concept of the part of the Constitution that's in there.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Do you speak dog?
His opinion about the president? Is that what it was us?
Complaining.
I don't have a question, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great.
Lee.
Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining me and singing. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Joyce. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. I'm
Okay.
glad.